Hi, everyone. Welcome to our J stream. We're just going to wait until more and more people start entering the webinar. Hello, for those of you just joining us, we're just going to give it another minute or two before we start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our J stream on Palestinian elections today. My name is Abby Kirschbaum, and I am the Assistant Director of Public Engagement at J Street. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are doing this webinar today about Palestinian elections as part of our pre-conference programming. This is a part of our J Street platform, which we've been running for the last year, where we talk about all sorts of topical issues and current events. And we have a series of events such as this as part of our pre-conference program. Our conference is actually taking place on April 18th and 19th, and we're going to be addressing some of these types of issues, such as Palestinian elections, at our conference. And so this series of programs is part of us being able to dig deeper into some of these key issues. And we have three such esteemed speakers to be able to speak a little bit more in-depthly about the Palestinian elections, and I'm going to introduce them. So before I do that, I just want to really encourage you, our wonderful audience, to ask questions. As you can see, we have the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and I really want to encourage you to ask questions throughout the session today. We're going to be having such a nuanced, detailed conversation about such a critical concept and topic, and we at J Street really want to encourage you to ask questions. So now I'm going to introduce our esteemed speakers, and I'm going to start with Dr. Dalal Iriquat. Dr. Dalal Iriquat is the Vice President of International Relations at the Arab American University of Palestine. Dr. Iriquat served as an advisor of strategic communications at the Palestinian Prime Minister's Office and previously taught at the Faculty of Law and Public Administration at Birzeit University near Ramallah. Dr. Iriquat holds multiple academic degrees, including a PhD in public administration from the Sorbonne. Dr. Bashar Azzeh is a member of the PLO Palestinian Liberation Organization National Council, PLO Center Council, International Secretary of the Palestinian Popular Struggle Front Party, and an advisor to the PLO. Dr. Azzeh was born and raised in Jerusalem. He completed his higher education in the US, including his PhD in political economy. Dr. Azzeh currently serves as the founding owner and chairman of the Tatweer Development Group. And now for Dima Abumaria, who will be our moderator today. Dima Abumaria serves as the Arab Affairs correspondent for the Media Line, a US news agency that focuses on Middle East policy. Prior to this role, Dima worked as a journalist for Sky News Arabia. Ms. Abumaria has been active in a number of human rights organizations such as Defense for Children International Palestine, an organization dedicated to defending and promoting the rights of children living in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And now, Dima, I will hand it over to you. Dima, I'm sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the introduction. And I will be starting with a little bit information about the elections and the announcement of the elections, etc. So after more than a decade of political stalemate, on January 15, President Authority Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas announced the legislative and presidential elections would be held in May and July, respectively, as President Abbas has amended the election law for one electoral cycle. The last presidential election, which President Abbas won, was held in January 2005. The last PLC election, which Hamas won, was held in January 2006. However, the PLC was essentially disbanded after Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip in June 2007, forcing President Abbas to promulgate laws by decree, which is a situation that will persist until elections are held, following which the PLC will be tasked with reviewing presidential edicts. So I'm going to start with Dr. Dalal. What do you think has helped create the atmosphere and urge for the Palestinian leadership to finally hold the second ever Palestinian elections?
Thank you very much, Dima, and good evening to everybody. Well, this is a very important question, since there is an argument that is going around which says that the Palestinians are finally holding elections because they are being pressured by the international community or by the new US administration. Well, probability is maybe. However, I would disagree with that argument, because it is very, very important to us to realize that for the past 16 years, we haven't had elections. I mean, the international community and the US administration, which had pressured the Palestinian Authority 2 decades ago to hold elections, who were very keen on Palestinian democracy and withholding of elections, did not care about elections or democracy for the past 16 years. So I would disagree with the argument that would say that they are pressured and they are put to a corner to hold elections. And here I would like to add another point, which is that the status quo of the current existence of the Palestinian political system is the best case scenario for Netanyahu. So I don't think those who are friends with Netanyahu and with the right-wing government would want Palestinian democracy or the cycle of elections to take place in Palestine. However, having said so, please focus on the words that I am using. I am saying that the friends of Netanyahu and the right-wing government would not want to go for elections or democracy or empowerment of the democratic cycle in Palestine. However, those who are friends with Israel, those who are friends with the strategic existence of the state of Israel in the region, should worry and should pressure and should work and urge and advocate for Palestinian democracy. One thing that I have to mention here is also the Biden administration. Well, it is obvious that Biden is looking forward to a new leadership, not only in Palestine, but also in Israel. And it is very important to mention that the Israeli elections are coming beforehand the Palestinian elections. I will stop here, waiting for the other questions. Thank you.
I have just a small part to add to this question. Do you think that the path that the former American administration took helped the Palestinian leadership or pushed them to plan for these elections finally?
I wouldn't put it this way, but I would spin it out around. I would say that maybe after 4 years of deadlock, 4 years of totally unfruitful discussions with the American administration or when it comes to negotiations, maybe the Palestinians felt that change is coming in the horizons and that anything is better than the last 4 years. Not saying that it is very promising. We shouldn't be very ambitious, not very optimistic. However, anything that would come with the new administration is definitely better than the Trump's administration for the Palestinians. So yes, they want to appear more positively on all scenes.
Right, but now with Bashar. Bashar, given the history between Fatah and Hamas for the past 14 years of division, do you believe that the May elections will withstand?
Thank you, Dima. I personally believe that this election is a must. And there is a lot of reasons that this election might not stand, from local internal politics to regional dynamics to Israel, to other issues related to COVID-19 and so on. There's many reasons that this election might not withstand, and I'm not going to go through the details of the regional and the local dynamics that are occurring today. But if we just focus on the internal politics, it's clear that for Hamas and Fatah, this election is very important. First, Hamas needs legitimacy. Today, still Hamas is considered a terror group in the US. Hamas is still considered an illegal entity governing let's say, a population in Gaza through a coup. Fatah or the PLO have not gone through election on the legislative body for, as Dalal mentioned, over 14 to 15 years. So the need for renewing legitimacy on one side and approaching legitimacy on the other side is imminent in such an era where every human being within this region is looking for a proper democratic system. So the urge is here. The question that we have to look at is that, is this local problems, the local internal issues, gonna derail this election or not? I believe we today have an election internally inside Hamas. This election will bring new leaders within Hamas. We have, and this might reflect on this election, positively or negatively, we don't know yet because the results are not out there. Within Fatah, we've been hearing a lot of internal politics of different lists or division within the party. I believe that Fatah in the end will come with a one united list. That's the way that most likely it will go forward with. So if they fix the internal problems, I think the election will not derail. I think the urge is important. But for your audience today, what's really important that this election is also important for preserving the two-state solution.
Yeah.
This election is of the PA election. The PA is a product of the Oslo Agreement and the last agreement we signed in 1994 and so on. Doing this election will preserve the two-state solution, stating that we are still believing on this system, though the popularity of the two-state solution is going way down within the young population, also probably within the young population in Israel, but I'm not an expert on the Israeli population, but this election is going to be key to that. The most important question here is that this election is about two elections, or actually three elections. One, and I call them, to put them in easy words, we have legislative election and political election. Legislative is the PLC, which is the parliament, but that parliament doesn't have political power. This PLC cannot decide on negotiation or in war or in peace. It's the PLO National Council that will be the third election, or the third after the presidential, that will be the political entity. And that's actually where the real impact on the two-state solution in the peace process and the relationship with Israel is going to be pretty much made at. Now, the presidential election is also important, and we will see this happening right after the PLC. So we have to really understand that this is a three-staged election that will lead to ultimately getting the PLO election, or as it's been said, PLO completion. And I just want to clarify why there's going to be no direct election in the PLO, is that most members of the PLC will be de facto default members of the PNC. So pretty much the new National Council will have to be composed of these members of the legislative body and potentially some other new that will be elected.
Bashar, what do you have to say about, since you mentioned that the PLO election is basically the most important one, since it's the entity responsible to make all of the political decisions, why the date for that election wasn't determined yet?
No, it's actually in the decree, it's determined. It says, it's fully clearly stated in the decree, the date, but it says completion of the PLO National Council. As I said, because half of the council is default members from the PLC who are elected directly by people internally. Let me explain something. The PLO is an entity that manages all Palestinians, not only in the West Bank and Gaza, East Jerusalem, but also Palestinians in Lebanon, Syria, in the West, in Europe, and the US. It's an umbrella for all the Palestinians, like the Jewish agency for the Jewish diaspora. So holding election for the PLO umbrella is almost a mission impossible with all these Palestinian diaspora. So this is why they called it completion. They have election, with local chapters in state in different countries, and those people who will be elected will be presented this new council, but the date is determined.
Okay. I'm going to just add one more part before I head to the second question. Many Palestinians, leading Palestinian thinkers, pointed out that the PA was pressured by the biased role played by the former American administration led by Trump in the past 4 years. And now we have a new American administration, the Biden administration. Do you think that the removal of the former American administration and that pressure being off the table would affect holding both elections?
Dalal or me? Dalal, you want to answer
Bashar.
this? Sure. Okay. Just quickly on this, I firmly believe that election, and I agree with what Dalal mentioned in the beginning, this is not by international pressure, including the US. There was no, I don't believe this was pressured by anybody, and I agree with Dalal. So I reaffirm that. I'm not saying that, yes, it wasn't driven. If Trump have won, probably there would be no horizon for political solution. So then the Palestinians will do more internal work. But I do not believe that's the real reason. The real reason is that the urge and the need to hold, to bring back a functional democracy for the people. In the end, the young generation, there's a whole generation born and raised after Oslo that have not since 2000, and they are almost 30% of this population who have not witnessed any election rather than the local election or municipal election. And this is a major issue. So I do believe it's not really a reason.
Okay. Thank you, Bashar. If the legislative elections occur, do you think the outcome of it will withhold the presidential election in July, and why?
Well, since you asked and you mentioned if the PLC elections will be held, I would like to clarify to the audience here that yes, in the Palestinian streets, everybody is enthusiastic. There is work being done to form the lists for elections and so on. However, there are a number of facts which we need to consider, and those facts might determine the fate of the holding of elections or not. For example, the Israeli will and permission to facilitate the elections themselves. And allow me to clarify here, for example, we hold in the past elections were held in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Jerusalem. Jerusalem is divided into J1 and J2. Only 6,000 Palestinian Jerusalemites were allowed to cast their votes inside Jerusalem, and the rest were asked to leave to the suburbs and the squares of Jerusalem to cast their votes. However, up until today, and we are around 2 weeks, 10 days away from the registration of official lists for who are running for elections, up until this moment, the Israeli government or the Israeli officials did not declare or announce their will of any facilitation of holding elections in Jerusalem. So up until now, we don't know whether elections will be taking place in Jerusalem or not, which means we don't know. There are no guarantees that the Palestinian Jerusalemites are going to be given the right of participating in the elections. So this is a request that has been made by the PA through the international community, the European Union, and so on, and maybe the US diplomats today, to pressure Israel to put an answer into this. So this might be a huge obstacle that might stop the holding of elections. Gaza is another story. But here we have to mention something else to maybe try to analyze why are the Palestinians on the official level holding the elections this year. Adding to Bashar's point on legitimacy, not only for Hamas, but also for the existing PA and political figures who are in power for almost 2 or 3 decades now. I would also add that the Palestinians need democracy for different reasons, and most importantly for the end of division, which has been going for a while. So to reach reconciliation, to bring unity to the Palestinian political life. Allow me to clarify here as well that there are 2 ways of looking into elections. As a political scientist, I look at elections as means and tools that would lead to democracy. It's only a tool or a means. However, if we look at the Palestinian political reality today, it is very easy to recognize and to realize that the PA and including Fatah and Hamas had realized that elections might be a tool or a step one towards unity and the end of division. That's why we have heard about the talk of joint lists, which democratically speaking, it will take out the content of the democratic content of the idea of elections. However, yes, it might lead to not very strategic, but medium-term unity and end of division into the Palestinian political arena.
Do you think there are other internal reasons for that besides Jerusalem and the Israeli approval for holding the elections in Jerusalem? Is there any internal reasons, obstacles we can mention here?
Well, as a political scientist, I would like to put it on the different obstacles which might come from the Israeli authorities and the occupying power, which might seriously affect the reality of the ability of holding elections or not. Mm-hmm. We, of course, have many different internal matters, but however, I don't find them substantial in stopping the holding of elections.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Dalal. The past dozen years have been an especially dysfunctional time in the Palestinian political life, mainly due to the 2000 division between Fatah-led PA in the West Bank and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, where both sides have been ruling their respective territories separately. So, Dr. Dalal, by that being said, why did many Palestinians, including senior Fatah officials, oppose the idea of a joint list between Fatah and Hamas?
As I was just explaining, the joint list, well, imagine, for example, the Conservative Party and the Democratic Party coming together in one list and running in elections together. Mm-hmm. I mean, how would you define democracy in that sense? As I was just trying to explain, yes, given the political reality in Palestine, given the division, the non-unity, and the need for reconciliation, this might be a step forward. This might be a step one towards a more balanced reality that would bring the two political major factions of Palestine together. However, democratically speaking, it will take out democracy's concept and basis from its core idea, because we cannot imagine two major parties and opposing parties running together. This is what we mean by saying power sharing, for example. This would only translate to power sharing. Do we need power sharing? We need democracy, we need reform, we need new faces, new mindsets, new policymakers who would change reality. However, given the existing political deadlocks on the reconciliation file, this might be a step forward. However, having followed what was happening for the past weeks, it is not very promising. It's obvious that every party is working to form their own list, and that would be better for democracy on the strategic front.
Nice, thank you. Over several years of unsuccessful reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, do you think the joint list option would make a difference in any way? And more importantly, which part of the population will benefit from that?
You talking to Dalal or me? Just to
no, this is for Dr. Dalal.
Dalal, yeah, because it's the same question.
You're coming right after.
Well, I'll give the floor to Bashar. I already gave my intervention on that. Bashar, I'll leave it to you.
Okay.
No, I think because I just want to comment on this. When Dr. Dalal spoke about the point of reconciliation. Indeed, this election came from the womb of reconciliation. We have divide between the West Bank and Gaza from 2006, which is a killer for the two-state solution. There's no way we can approach two-state solution or any solution by having the West Bank divided from Gaza. All previous attempts to end the division, the divide between West Bank and Gaza have been through an approach, let's do everything today, let's do whatever needs to be done today, and go through this to end the division. The new approach is different. It's saying, let's build trust through ballots, and then we will conclude the division. And that's why they started with election, because election is a trust building mechanism. And it's good. I think this is good that we will have election as a trust building mechanism. The question that we have on the joint list or no joint list, I agree that this is not good for democracy to have a joint list. It's not really appropriate. I think having separate list is what's really needed. I think the internal politics now is going definitely toward 2 to 3 lists. Maybe we'll have 5 to 7 lists. We don't know yet. The 21st, people will submit their list, and the 30th will be the deadline of March for those lists. So we will know. And I think, let me just be clear about one thing. We need this election with either or any outcome. We want the young population to really see a functional democracy, a parliament, where laws and regulations are going through, committees operating, and when people want to complain, they can call their representative and complain or advocate. We need to bring that culture back. And whatever we have to do it to bring that culture. And then hoping for the election that will be held 4 years after, the culture of democracy, when Dalal mentioned that the election is means of democracy, it's not democracy itself. Within the next 4 years, this culture will be empowered and we will have a proper, complete election where young people will actually be more into this election. So this is how I see the situation on that issue.
So you just touched on my second question, which is, do you think the option of a joint list between Fatah and Hamas, of course, undermines the chances for other parties and independent personas in terms of the elections, including young people who are trying, to run, or like any independent party or whatever?
I think for those who want to make a list and get into election, there shouldn't be, if there is a joint list, and I doubt there's going to be a joint list, they shouldn't be scared by that joint list. They should do the work and prepare their own list. Let me just be clear. This is a proportional election.
But it will include the 2 major parties, Bashar, Fatah and Hamas.
I really doubt there's going to be a joint list. Let's just be clear. One party is a political Islamic party, and one party is more of a liberal political party. You cannot really mix them together in one joint list. I just don't really believe it. I think that the dynamics of each party will not allow to go into a joint list. The narrative of the joint list came from the concept of a unified Palestinian unity on the election. And I think that's a good heart, good spirit, but I doubt we will see a united list. By the way, the lists have to be submitted in almost 11, 12 days. And we haven't heard internally of any joint list between Hamas and Fatah till today. So I think this is too late, and I think we will see a separate list between Hamas and Fatah. Now the question is, what about others? What about independents? What about young people? What about other people? We are hearing, and I'm sure that Dr. Dalal will say this too, a lot of people are forming lists. We heard of Dr. Salam Fayyad, the previous prime minister. We have heard of other independents creating their own list. We will have political factions in the PLO creating their own list. So let's wait till the 21st and see what kind of lists will be submitted, and then we can start judging the negativity or the positivity of it. Unfortunately, I'm telling you, with COVID-19, with economic crisis, with inability to move due to occupation and due to COVID-19, the restrictions are higher on a lot of those young independents to come and create those lists, including a lot of the changes to the law that made it not easy to create a whole list, because this is a proportional election. The whole country, as we said, is a whole circuit or a whole district. It's not anymore a district where few people in one district could actually get a seat. So yes, it's not easy, but I think we have to go through it in order to bring a functional democracy for the future.
Nice. Thank you, Bashar. Another question for you. According to recent polling data by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, roughly half of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza have no faith in the electoral process. What are the reasons behind that and implications, Bashar?
Simply, Dima, they haven't witnessed democracy. They haven't witnessed an election before. So I would have no faith in a system that doesn't exist in my time frame. I was born and raised, if I'm born in 1998 or 2000, 2001, and I haven't witnessed any election, and I was 5 or 6 years in 2006, I would have no faith in the system. All I can see for the last 14, 15, 20 years of my life is no election, Hamas in the West, in Gaza, PLO in the West Bank, and Israeli occupation, and Israeli settlements, and Israeli wall, and Israeli war in Gaza. So that's what I witnessed as a young person in that age. So definitely my faith in the system will be very terrible and will be almost zero. Putting all this in a pot, this will be the outcome. What we need to do is to bring that faith back. And to bring that faith, we need this election to happen. And once it happens, and we go through a process of a couple of years of functionality, then this faith issue will change.
Okay, thank you, Bashar. So President Abbas' amendments of the election law included an increase in women's representation in the PLC, but females were unhappy as he raised their quota to 26%, but not the promised 30%, as throughout the years, women's organizations lobbied for an increased female presence in the PLC, and they have a document from the PLO to increase the representation by 30%. Based on that, Dr. Dalal, what does the women political representation nowadays look like in the PA? Of course, given the pandemic and other recent affairs.
Well, unfortunately, the Palestinian women representation in the PA is very, very modest and humble to reflect the Palestinian women competence. For example, in the Palestinian cabinet, we only have 14% of women representation. In the PNC, 11%. In the local councils, 21%. In judiciary, 17%. We have 16 governorates in Palestine. Only one female governor is represented in this segment. On the civil sector, we only have 44% of women representation. However, those holding the position of general director and above are only 13%. Men are still taking 87% of the senior top positions in the PA. And when it comes to diplomatic corps and representation, also women ambassadors make around 11%. So in the executive, in the PLO executive committee, after the resignation of Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, there is no representation for women in this most senior political making body of the PLO. So when you ask me about the women's political participation in decision making in Palestine, unfortunately, it does not reflect the Palestinian woman competence, neither knowledge or experience or education. When it comes to the elections, I am hoping, and to build on Bashar's point after your question on the youth and their enthusiasm towards election, I would add to his reasoning is we are used that the current political system and the current political parties are much more focused on the reproduction of their own party rather than the more inclusive policy, for example. We are hoping for more inclusive realities on the youth level and on the women representation level. However, having witnessed how policy making is being done and how politics is being run in Palestine for the past 3 decades, let's say, this is they have the reason to doubt the elections and the formation of lists and whether those parties want to just reproduce themselves or and work for their own legitimacy, or that they want to reproduce a better democracy for the Palestinians. On the presidential decree regarding the percentage of women participation on the list, he had specified and amended the law to include 1 woman in the first 3 names on the list, and then another 1 woman on every 4 names on the list, which amounts to 28% of the formation. However, and this is a sad reality that we are facing, which I need to clarify here, most people look at this representation as the maximum, as the full potential of women representation. We need to clarify to those forming the list that this is the minimum. This is the quota that he had included, like to make sure that women representation is at least 20% to 28%. So this does not mean that they could not include more women. I truly want everybody to clarify that that decree, because unfortunately on the Palestinian ground, it is not, there is some confusion around the interpretation of this decree. They are only focused on the 28% rather than saying this is the minimum representation for women. I hope that elections will be held, and I hope that it will be more inclusive and reflective of women and youth in Palestine.
And just to add on Dalal, I think what we need to see, since the 28 or 26 is the minimum, we encourage those parties, Hamas, Fatah, factions of the PLO, independents, to actually have a high number of women in their list. So not to stick with the quota and only place 26% women in the list, but rather have 50 or 51. And I think this is going to be the real démarche that we're doing right now, is telling everybody you should have a higher number of women and not sticking to the minimum. This is exactly what Dalal was mentioning. And I think this is what we are advocating right now as people. And I think this is where we want to push the women in the society to come and say, no, we want to be more, we want to have a higher number within the list. I believe this election is all about women. Women voting rate is much higher than men in Palestine. In the last election, in municipal election, and in all elections. And I think they should vote for and ask for their representation in this election. I think this is going to be crucial, but I hope we can be able to get more number of women, higher number than the quota.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. Thank you, Bashar. And I believe you touched on my second question. You answered it, but I have a small part of it which still needs an answer. So what has been done differently to increase youth participation and representation in the upcoming elections? And I have another question for you, Bashar, from our audience. You mentioned that the younger population is not in favor for the two-state solution. What are they looking for in terms of a solution to the conflict, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Can you please answer that? Thank you.
Let me just jump to the second question, because I think the first question we've been elaborating on it a lot, just to go on the young population. And I think Dalal is also working with a lot of the students in the universities, and I'm sure she can give her feedback. I believe the young generation today is sensitive to rights. This is a whole global movement. The Palestinian population is not anymore an island separated from the rest of the world. With globalization and social networking and tech savviness, the young population in Palestine today is very similar to this of the international youth movement anywhere, in the US, in Europe, in the Arab world, and they are very sensitive to their rights. They want the right of determination, the right of access and movement, the right to education, the rights. Rights is what they are looking for at right now, and this is including the right of them to be free and free of occupation. Now, the question is it a one-state or two-state model? I'm not saying that they are ready to say, yes, let's go only for one state, because they really don't understand what is this one-state model, or the means of getting a real one-state model will be going through an apartheid, because Israel will not accept it, one-state model of full participation of the Palestinian citizens in it. What I'm trying to say is that the youth desire today is still not clear as a path, but it's based on the sensitivity to their rights. Now, we can cultivate it toward more of a two-state solution, or we can cultivate it to more toward of a one-state solution that will be de facto apartheid in the beginning, but they believe even if that apartheid exists, it's a reality of today that's an apartheid. Do you think that we live in a two-state reality or a one-state reality? No, we live in a one-state de facto reality where the Palestinians are living under apartheid in a complete system that they are fully having no rights, and they're not treated as any form of citizen. With the wall, with the siege in Gaza, with inability to move easy in the West Bank sometimes, with the settlements expansion over our natural resources and our land, with them, income per capita in the Palestinian territory is going down to the bottom. The young population is seeing this as an issue, and they want to live like everybody else in the world. And that for them may be the one state, but it's the end of an apartheid. That's the one state reality to look at.
And why do you think the Palestinian young people are not for the two-state solution anymore?
They lost hope. The two-state solution that was advocated and fought for by many of our leaders who still believe in it, and I understand, but they fought for it. They have promised us a two-state solution in a number of years. Unfortunately, it's been over 25 years, and we haven't got the two-state solution. So the reality of today is a one-state apartheid solution of a status quo. So for them, the failure of the two-state is meaning there's no more faith in it. To preserve and bring back that faith, you need to have substantial steps to get that faith back, including access to Area C, restrictions, mobility, freedom of movement, freedom internally and externally. That they don't have to see occupation on a daily matter, minute by minute, and that is not happening today. So they have lost faith.
Yeah, I have another question for you, Bashar, from our
I think
audience.
also I would like Dalal to add on this, because I think also with her exposure with the university students, I think we would like to just comment on this. Yes.
Absolutely. Please, Dr. Dalal.
Thank you, Bashar. And it also corresponds with some of the questions which were asked regarding the residents of Jerusalem's right to voting and why would it matter?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, let's just, I think I'm obliged to explain to the audience tonight that the Palestinians, in the name of the PLO, had gone into the peace process in the early 90s, and they had recognized the right of the state of Israel to exist. However, until today, none of the Israeli leaders or government had recognized the right of the Palestinian people to exist. The international references for the peace process, which the whole world had accepted, the European Union, the UN, and the different US administrations, was based on the two-state solution, which was not the Palestinian position. It was the Palestinian concession. We accepted the two-state solution based on the 1967 borderline, which means to establish the Palestinian state side by side with the Israeli state in full sovereignty and independence on the 67 borderline, including the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. So today, if we hold elections, and let me remind you that the previous elections, unfortunately, the Palestinian democracy was not respected, neither accepted, internationally speaking. The result of the Palestinian elections, the Palestinian democracy, was totally objected and demonstrated against. So today, would the whole world, would the international community, the US administration, or the European Union, or the Israelis themselves accept the result of the Palestinian democracy? This is another question that needs to be held in the case of the holding of elections. On the two-state solution, well, the young generation, and I include myself one, we were young, we were teenagers, when the Palestinian leadership, the PLO leadership, and Azzeh Iriquat, who happened to be my father, had dedicated his life to negotiations, to the peace process, to dialogue, to peaceful tools, in order to bring peace and security in this region to his kids, his grandchildren, and those of the Israelis on the other side. However, he left this world without delivering his dream and promises to his people. So when the young Palestinian generations who had grown for the past 3 decades, hearing the promises of Azzeh Iriquat and the PLO people who engaged in serious and very dedicated negotiations with the other side to bring peace to our region, could not deliver, in reality, all we see is more settlements, all we see is annexation. And allow me to clarify here that the core idea of annexation is basically the ongoing settler project, the ongoing colonial project. On a daily basis, we witness more and more confiscation of land. And if I were Jewish, seriously, and I have to share this with you tonight, if I were Jewish, I would be very, very, very ashamed of the Israeli government and the Israeli Knesset, who had passed the Jewish nation-state law in 2018. This is apartheid. This is racism. I mean, how would a civilized human being, and I include myself one, and I'm sure most of you are, how would you accept that reality? For the strategic existence of the state of Israel, trust me, those policies and this way of thinking need to be altered. Everybody should be keen and urging and advocating and working hard on giving the Palestinians their rights, and not only their civil rights or their rights to mobility or worship or education, which are all deprived. We're all deprived from. However, our political rights are also on top priority. You know, we still have 6,000 prisoners in Israeli jails. We have checkpoints surrounding every Palestinian village and city. So if I want to take my kids, for example, to visit their grandmother on the weekend, we have to pass at least 2 checkpoints from Ramallah to Jericho, which is only a 35 minutes commute. They have to see the Israeli soldiers pointing their guns into the car. So this atmosphere of hatred, this atmosphere of fear and of apartheid and of occupation, to answer the question that was mentioned here, I don't like to call Israel the occupation state. However, what we see on daily basis on the Palestinian side is only occupation. We don't get to meet the Israeli civilized citizen of Herzliya or Tel Aviv. No, all we see is the Israeli soldiers who are pointing guns at the Palestinian civilians on every entry point of every Palestinian village and city.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. I'm going to go back to you, Bashar, because we have this question about Hamas and the changes in the Hamas leadership. And how does that affect, they're asking, how will that affect the negotiations between Fatah and Hamas in terms of the elections after Sinwar was re-elected?
So just to clarify, Sinwar was re-elected as the top man of Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is going through election of the top position, where they call the political officer or the head of the political office. This election is not ended yet. We don't know who is the man, most likely the man, unfortunately also, who will be running that office. Sinwar winning in Gaza was expected. If anybody analyzed Hamas easily, they will know that Sinwar is the man in Gaza. So this came no surprise to us. And this is not gonna, is it reflecting on the negotiation with Fatah? I think right now, no, because this is what's known before. I said in the beginning that internal election and Hamas might reflect on this election. I don't believe that, because I think Hamas as a total have taken decision to go through this election in order to gain legitimacy. And their internal election will not really reflect negatively on this election. In the contrary, it will reflect positively. So that's on that point. On Jerusalem, really important, we signed an agreement with Israel. The US and Israel talks about international law. So international law says, by the agreement we signed, people in Jerusalem, like myself, have the right to vote in East Jerusalem. Simple. If we go, the question is that we are always bypassing. Why do Palestinians have to abide by international law when they are required to do things? And when Israel is required to do things, they don't have to abide by international law. That's the fundamental question that we as Palestinians are asking day by day. The double standard is the real issue.
Yeah, I agree. But can you, Bashar, focus on the importance of the participation of the residents of East Jerusalem? Why is it so important for them to participate in this election?
First of all, they are Palestinians, part of the Palestinian structure. Even Israelis recognize them. I am a Jerusalemite. I have an ID. It's an Israeli ID, but it says I'm a resident. They claim I'm a resident. I'm not even a citizen of my town. Pretty much they are claiming legally that I am part of the Palestinian society. Second is the two-state solution. It's important for East Jerusalemites to vote. If they don't vote, then you're actually killing the two-state solution by saying that East Jerusalem is not anymore part of the Palestinian potential state. Third, it's the right. We don't vote. Jerusalemites, East Jerusalemites, we don't have the right to vote in Israel. We don't want it. We're not Israeli citizens. We need the right to vote. And the only place that we can vote as Palestinians is within the Palestinian structure. So international law, rights in general, and also preserving the two-state solution. This is very fundamental on this election.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question to you, Bashar. Thank you so much for your answer. But do you think the Palestinians who do not live in the West Bank will be able or eligible to vote?
So just to clarify, the PA election, when Dalal mentioned that in 1994 we had the Oslo Agreement, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was created as a big legislative body in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza to manage the daily life of the Palestinians in that area. So it's a legislative body there. Now, for Palestinians who are not now residents or Palestinian citizens of the PA in the Palestinian territory, they cannot vote because they're not living there. But for those who are Palestinians in Syria, Lebanon, or diaspora, they can vote in the PLO. And the PLO is the legal political entity that they can enjoy to be part of. Unfortunately, in the PA now, if we become a state, all Palestinian citizens will be able to do, at least they have the right to vote in that state. But currently, unfortunately, the current system, the current agreements, and the current placement make it only for the locals, Palestinians who live within the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem to vote in this election. But we must not undermine the right of those Palestinians in diaspora to vote in the political entity, which is the PLO. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bashar. Dr. Dalal, I have another question for you, which is it in the interest of the Palestinian politicians to advocate for a confederation agreement during the lead up to the elections?
Well, if we're talking about the end of division again, and the unity for the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, yes, it might. Yes, it might. I cannot disagree on political science analysis basis. However, as I said, it takes the democratic content out of its core. So let's wait. It's been announced that on the 16th and 17th, the political factions will be meeting again in Egypt. Hopefully that harmony will come out and unfold after the meetings. I can only say that, yes, it might lead to more stabilizing, more balanced atmosphere on the political level. However, if we are keen on democracy, it is not the best case scenario. But here I have to add that we hope that those elections will not be the only elections every 2 decades, for example. If we consider that those elections will be taking place every 4 years. So yes, I would agree here that we might have a joint test this year for some reason, because as we say, the ends justify the means, like to end the division and to work for reconciliation and unity between the Palestinian factions, on the basis, on the guarantees that we will have more and more elections every 4 years, and that the democratic cycle will be ongoing, allowing a democracy and allowing those youth and every Palestinian citizen to re-believe in their own role. Because again, Dima, as we all know, the Palestinian youth, and as Bashar mentioned, I teach in the university, and I see how the morale and the sense of their own roles in changing reality is diminishing within the Palestinian youth, because they have not been practicing their right in the political decision-making process in Palestine. So I hope that this will be a process that will lead to a better reforming of the structures of the political system in Palestine that would allow more inclusion of young people and women, and that would be ongoing to facilitate for a better political system in Palestine that would bring together opposing political parties, because differentiation and differences are healthy. We need opposition in order to reform. We need accountability. We need a legislative body that would stand next to the PNC body. And I want to add on Bashar's point on the Palestinian rights of vote. Let's make it clear. Every Palestinian citizen of the world should have the right to vote when we have the state of Palestine established on the 67 borderline with East Jerusalem as capital. However, given the realities today, it is only for the Palestinian citizens and living in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, which does not include, of course, some certain categories of the Palestinians, including the refugees, for example, until those issues are resolved with negotiations.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. We have another question about the leading Fatah leader, Marwan Barghouti, who was sentenced to 5 life terms in Israeli prison. We're asking here, will Marwan Barghouti be a candidate for the president's elections? And if so, how do you expect him to succeed?
Well, let me just be clear. Every Palestinian has the right to nominate herself or himself. And he belongs to a party, and this is his internal party decision. If they decide that, or he decides with them that he should run, that's their internal politics. I think that Palestinians will be happy to see candidates for presidency, but it's all about the internal politics of his party. And I think that if he runs as part of his politics or out of his own party politics, it's two different dimensions. So we don't know yet. We don't know if he's going to run within his party or out of his party. The issue here is internal politics of his party. But let me just be clear. A person like Marwan or any other person, we encourage people to, it's an open democracy. It should allow anybody to run for presidency, including Marwan. But some people in political parties, they have to buy part. In parties, they have primaries, like in the Democratic Party, that will let to Biden be the president or the nominee. So this is internal political parties' decisions. And whatever comes out of it, that's what people in that party will respect. So I think this question has to be oriented to those who are in that party. And if he runs alone, separately, that's also his decision. Would he succeed or not? The polling will be different. There is no polling done if he's running alone or part of his party or not part of his party. So we have to see what would be the reflection if he runs without the structure of his party alone. I believe that Fatah will unite itself. Fatah will try to get to this election in a united form. It's very important. And I hope they do, because this is good. I hope they do, because it's important that each party is not divided. But the most important part, and this is where I agree with Dalal, is that we need to see more competition, more faces, not from the same political structures and political system, political factions. So we want to see more. Most people are even the international community is so overwhelmed with the same names, thinking that this is the way forward. But they even ignore the fact that we want more competition of younger generation running or people who are not actually part of the system already from within.
Thank you, Bashar. And to our last question, I'm gonna direct it to Bashar and Dalal, both of them. What's the impact on the US-Palestinian relations if the elections were to be upheld or not?
So on my side, I'm going to be very precise. US calls for democracy, US calls for international law, US calls for human rights, civil rights, and the right of individuals. And this election is all about this. It's all about preserving functional democracy, reinstating law and international law. And third is to bring proper regulations and laws to preserve the right of human rights, civil rights in the Palestinian potential, hopefully, state. We need this election. So the US should be encouraged by this election, and they should encourage this election. That's how I see it. Now, let me just be saying, let's talk about the elephant in the room for 1 second, and that's Hamas. Hamas legitimizing itself through the process is very important. Hamas getting into the system to be included in the legislative body is very important. This election, the law was based on the PLO basic law, meaning every nominee running for this election must sign on the PLO basic law, meaning they must accept the PLO principles and the PLO agreements. We want, let me just be clear, and I say it again, we want Hamas to come closer to the PLO, and we want Hamas to come closer to the borders of 67, two-state solution, non-violence, and negotiation. That's what we want. And if it is this election that will lead to PLO election, will bring Hamas toward us to be closer to these principles, then we want this election to happen, and the US should welcome it. That's how I look at it.
Thank you, Bashar. Dr. Dalal, do you have anything to add here?
Yes. I think what is important today for every single audience with us tonight is to try through your own channels, your organizations, to try to pressure those in Israel to facilitate the logistics of holding elections in Palestine. This is to start with. On the American administration level, it is very important for all of us to remember that Biden himself was heavily involved in the last negotiations with the, especially when in the Kerry talks. So he knows it very well. He knows the leadership very well. And to be honest, the fact that he did not appoint an ambassador to Tel Aviv, to Israel, and the fact that he is not penetrating the Palestinian politics very obviously or clearly until today, I think Biden is waiting for different leaderships, not only on the Palestinian side, but also on Israel. So let us all work, put our heavyweights on Palestine, on Israel, to bring about a different leadership, because change is healthy. I mean, somebody would say, the evil you know is better than the evil you don't know. However, we need a different mindset, a different mentality and way of looking into things in order to bring about a brighter future and brighter realities for us and for our children to live in peace and security with each other.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dalal. Thank you, our brilliant speakers. And we don't have more questions for you. I'm going to take it now to Abby. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Dima. I just really wanted to take the opportunity to thank our wonderful moderator, Dima, and our two excellent speakers, Dr. Azzeh and Dr. Iriquat. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to hear your insights and perspectives. So really thank you for being here and for sharing your opinions. It's really valuable for us as a movement. So I also wanted to just make one final plug for our J Street National Policy Conference taking place. Thank you for sharing that background. It's going to be April 18th to 19th. I'm just going to once again put the link for the registration in the chat for all of you. If you have not registered yet, please do so that we can continue to have these important and necessary conversations. Thank you so much to everyone who was here today, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.